Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the government was defeated in the House of Lords last week on the issue of whether or not Britain should be in some form of customs union with the EU after Brexit. Government policy is to leave the customs union, but this week a cross-party group of MPs is trying to maintain the pressure with a further debate and another vote in the Commons. The Conservative MP Nicky Morgan is spearheading the motion, and she joins me now from Loughborough. Thanks very much for talking to us this morning. Your motion says that the government has to include as an objective in the negotiations the establishment of an effective customs union. You know that means that the UK won't be able to operate an independent trade policy after Brexit, and you're really going to tie their hands on what they will be able to do after we've left the EU.
Well, firstly, I don't think that's quite right, and I think it was the Institute of Directors that have suggested a partial customs union arrangement, which would allow, for example, some trade deals to be negotiated. And of course, I was listening to Baroness Scotland earlier in your programme, and she was talking about the deals that the UK can negotiate with Commonwealth countries and others around the world. We're members of the EU customs union at the moment, and I think it's clear that we are going to leave the current union.
So we're working hard on it.
You were talking about business and trade as well. Can trade opportunities in the Commonwealth replace some of the trade that we do as a member of the European Union after Brexit? And do we have to leave the customs union in order to make that a reality?
Well, the first thing to say is we identified back in 2015, which was before Brexit, that there was a 19% advantage in trading with members of the Commonwealth because of our language. We speak the same language, because we have the same common law, because we have the same institutions. It makes it easier, better, cheaper to work together. And we've been working on that, and we're hopeful that with the things that we are now able to do using the WTO facilitation agreement and the new agreement on the continental free trade area in Africa, we could increase our intra-Commonwealth trade maybe to $1 trillion by 2020.
And does that need the freedom of having left the EU customs union in order to strike new free trade deals with Commonwealth countries?
Well, this isn't about free trade deals. We can do this anyway, and we would have been doing it anyway. So I think what we have to concentrate on is the Commonwealth is a huge opportunity. Trade is going east. The Commonwealth has 2.4 billion people. It's a great opportunity. I think the Commonwealth is where it's at.
Baroness Scotland, thanks very much for coming in to talk to us.
But I think it's worth stepping back and saying, why are we still debating this? And why is it right that the motion has been brought forward by 10 Select Committee chairmen on behalf of something called the Liaison Committee? It's backbench business. We're still debating it because actually it's a very complex issue. It sort of captures Brexit in a microcosm, and it has ramifications for our manufacturing industry, our goods, exports and imports, and also for the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which is both economically important, but actually politically and culturally and emotionally as well. And secondly,
you know that it's government policy
to gathering evidence all the time.
It's government policy. The Prime Minister has been very clear that the UK will be leaving the customs union and doesn't want to form any kind of new customs union with the EU. And you know the accusation is going to be that you're attempting to reverse Brexit, because some of your fellow Tory MPs, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, say if we stay in any kind of customs union, then it's Brexit in name only.
Well, I mean, just to tackle that head on, I think that the minute everybody starts screaming, hysteria about when the House of Lords passes an amendment, MPs put an amendment down to the trade bill, we have this debate, it really doesn't show Parliament in a very good light discussing what is a critical issue. Brexit is going to happen. So we are going to leave the European Union in March 2019. The question is how we do it now. And to expect members of Parliament, peers, but particularly elected members of Parliament, not to want to voice the opinions they're hearing from constituents, from businesses, and as I was going to just say, the select committees are taking evidence almost continuously now on Brexit, not just Hilary Benz exiting the EU Select Committee, but the Treasury Select Committee, which I chair, Yvette Cooper's Home Affairs Committee, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Northern Ireland Select Committee, the Trade Committee. We have to have a way of getting that evidence that we are hearing out to be discussed in the main chamber. And it seemed to us that having a motion like the one we're going to discuss on Thursday as part of backbench business time was the right way to do it. It's away from legislation, away from amendments. It's an ability for MPs to discuss this, hopefully in a rational and calm way. But the point, actually, your original question about the Prime Minister's view, I mean, she was very clear, both in Lancaster House speech in January 2017, but also in the Mansion House speech just last month, that although we will be leaving the customs union, actually the government is open to a customs partnership or arrangement or something else, which means that we do not have a hard border in the island of Ireland, but also we have frictionless trade. And I think it's right that MPs should be trying to tease that out, and that's what we're doing.
This debate that you've instituted isn't going to force the government to do that, though, is it? I mean, it's not surprising you're being criticised by Brexiteers like Jacob Rees-Mogg, but arch Remainer, your friend Anna Soubry, says this won't be a meaningful vote at all. She's sponsoring an amendment to the trade bill, which would have some more significance. What is the point of this vote?
Well, because of exactly the reason I've just talked about, which is actually the select committees are gathering all this evidence. We need to have a way to make sure that we put it in front of MPs, have it all debated in the chamber. And I think what Anna was saying, I mean, it's obviously, you know, this is not an amendment to legislation. So a backbench business motion is not necessarily going to force the government's hand. But what it does do is it gives the government, and particularly the business managers, the whips on both sides, a very clear indication of where MPs are in this sort of issue. And there's 10 Conservative MPs that have signed the Customs Union Amendment to the trade bill, and I think that shows the strength of feeling on our side. So this is a very important issue. Time is marching on. I think the EU want to get this agreed as soon as possible, and I'm sure the UK government does. And Thursday is another opportunity for ministers to come to the House and to update the House on where negotiations have got to, and that's important too.
Nicky Morgan, stay with us if you will. I'm just going to bring in some of our panel on this issue. Ian Martin, do you take what she is saying there in good faith that it's important to look at all the evidence that the Select Committee chairs have about the effects of leaving the customs union?
Well, I think, as someone who voted for Brexit, I think it's praiseworthy that Parliament is taking its duties seriously, and Parliament should be discussing this. I think things are getting slightly late in the process. I think it's now, because Britain can't make up its mind about a customs union, is potentially disrupting the negotiations with the EU. But I think while I would praise those who want Parliament to have their say, I just think what's most interesting about this is that there may potentially be consequences or implications if not this vote on Thursday, but the key vote on the trade bill is lost. Then I think you're in territory where it is not that difficult to envisage members of the ERG, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, and others who are very much pro-Brexit, who see the customs union as a sellout. It's possible then to envisage the circumstances in which a leadership election is triggered.
Nicky Morgan, let me put that back to you. If that were the consequence of any of these votes on remaining in the customs union, that it did trigger a leadership contest against your Prime Minister, is that a risk you're willing to take?
Well, let's be very clear, and I think Ian has just put it very well. That risk to the Prime Minister's leadership, all this sabre-rattling we're hearing weekend, is not coming from the section of the party that I represent. It is coming from the pro-Brexit section of the party, and it's deeply unhelpful. And as I say, if every time Parliament debates these issues or passes an amendment or anything like that, all we end up with is a sort of hysteria and leadership speculation, that really is not in Britain's interests. So I think that actually the majority of the Conservative Party would not entertain a leadership contest at the moment, and those who want to might have enough names to send in letters to the 1922 Backbench Committee chairman, but that's about as far as it will get. And if they did, they should think very carefully about whether they really want to intervene in negotiations in the way the leadership contest would.
Nicky Morgan, thanks very much for that. Let me bring you in, Kate, and just talk about some of the tactics around this. So, I mean, even Nicky Morgan herself has explained this is a backbench motion this week. There will be a more substantive amendment to the trade bill coming up later in the process. They believe there is a majority in the House of Commons for staying in the customs union and that they can force a change in government policy here. Do you think they can?
Well, I think we'll have to wait and find out. But what I would like to understand is where Nicky Morgan's position differs from where the government is at the moment. Because if you listen to what Nicky Morgan is saying, she's saying we don't really want to stay in the customs union. We want to stay in a version of the customs union where we could also still strike trade deals. And that's not necessarily something that ministers have ruled out yet. So I don't really necessarily see where these two positions are different. But I think where we will, as Ian says, where it will come down to the line is in the proper votes, when these votes become meaningful. And that's where you get a situation where you've got to find out whether MPs care more about their party or about Brexit. And that's when you get into this issue of leadership. Do they want it to be about the Conservative Party and about a leadership question, or do they want it to be about Brexit and the future of the country and the direction that's going to take? And I think we will only find out the answer to that question when we get down to the votes that really matter.
Holly?
It will all be revealed. We know that the Tory party is profoundly split and nobody knows which way, and they know a certain number of, there's Nicky Morgan, there's Annie Soubry, there's Ken Clarke, outspoken people. There are a whole lot of sort of sleepers there. And until we get the real vote, which won't be, it'll be an interesting debate on Thursday. It'll bring a lot of the granular problems out as each of these heads of select committees point out the appalling problems if we do leave a customs union altogether. What we won't get now is to know how many of those Tories who also are very concerned, they read the Financial Times every week, every day, how many of them will be brave enough to step forward and back Nicky Morgan. I think when it comes to it, they will put the country first. And when it comes to the real vote, they know, they look at the Irish border disaster if we don't, and there is no other answer. And I'm optimistic that Nicky Morgan and her people will win through.
Well, Nicky Morgan is still with us. I've got one last question I'd like to put to you, if you don't mind. In 2004, when the Tories were in opposition, Theresa May said very clearly that she was absolutely sick and tired of Labour ministers who wouldn't take responsibility and were blaming officials, and it was time that they stepped up to take responsibility for the policies that they had set. Do you agree with her on that?
Well, I think it's always been the way that actually, although you are often in the hands as a minister of your officials in terms of the way decisions are put into effect, ultimately the ministers are responsible. And if you're referring to the Windrush affair in particular, then I think Theresa May has made it very clear that one of the key decisions about the structure of landing cards was not taken by her, but taken by the previous Labour Home Secretary.
But when the current Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, came to the Commons, it did sound as though she was blaming officials for the way the policy had been implemented and not taking responsibility for what the policy was.
No, I think Amber has taken responsibility, actually, and the Prime Minister, because both of them, as you've shown in your clips earlier on, they've been very clear about saying sorry and apologising and everything else. I think what Amber was saying was that, and I think this is right, sometimes in politics it's very easy to start talking about numbers and talking about sort of big policy issues and to lose sight of the people at the heart of the decisions that you're taking and the people that are affected. And that's why actually the system we have of constituency MPs, mainly being ministers in this country, is so important, because we have, and I did this when I was Education Secretary, you can make your big decisions in the department, and at the end of the week you go back, you do your surgery, and you sit there opposite parents and teachers and classroom assistants and others, and you've got to explain, remind yourself. And that's why our ministers are so important, because I found my time reminding officials about the fact that it was people who were affected by decisions we were taking.
All right, well, Nicky Morgan and all of my panel, thank you very much for your contributions today. That's it for the programme.